Michael Jordan conquered the world, then broke down on a locker room floor. 6 NBA titles, 6 Finals Most Valuable Player awards, the last shot in Utah, I'm back, Air Jordan, Jumpman. The world remembers the flying silhouette, the cold stare, and the impossible body hanging above defenders as if gravity had briefly lost its power. But on Father's Day, 1996, the most feared competitor in basketball was not standing above the game he had mastered. He was lying on the floor, clutching the championship ball to his chest, crying for the father who would never see him win again. Behind number 23 was a son carrying a silence no arena could cheer away. And now, at 63, the ball is no longer in his hands. The jersey still hangs, the shoes still sell, the highlights still roar. But what happens when the greatest winner in basketball history has no scoreboard left to conquer? Before we begin, honor Michael Jordan with a like and subscribe, a tribute to the man who taught the world how high greatness could rise and how heavy the landing could become. The gym at Laney High did not know it was holding a legend's beginning. After school, when the noise thinned and the floor reflected the last light of the day, a teenage Michael Jordan was still just another boy chasing a place on the court. The shoes on his feet were not a logo yet. The ball in his hands was not part of an empire. He was born in Brooklyn in 1963, but Wilmington, North Carolina, gave him the rhythm beneath every jump shot. Family order, chores, competition, correction, and the hard feeling that nothing valuable would be handed to him. James Jordan brought discipline into the house, with a mechanic's steadiness. Dolores Jordan held the family together, with structure, expectation, and a belief that her children had to carry themselves with purpose. Michael was one of 5 children, and inside that house, praise did not arrive cheaply. The closest scoreboard was often his older brother Larry, quick, tough, and fearless enough to make Michael feel smaller. Larry was the first opponent who mattered, because he stood close enough to turn love into pressure. On a backyard court, in games where no camera waited, he learned the ache of being almost good enough. That early wound had no national headline. It looked like a boy measuring himself against an older brother, a coach's decision, a roster where his name did not sit where he wanted it to be, and a hallway where disappointment had to be swallowed before anyone could see it. The famous Laney High story should never be handled like a fairy tale. It was a young player being forced to face a colder truth. Wanting the court did not guarantee the court would want him back. When he was placed away from the varsity spotlight early in high school, the pain came from the private sting of being told, without cruelty, that he had more work to do. He did not have the height yet. He did not have the name yet. He did not have permission to act wounded. So he returned to the gym. The ball hit the floor again. The same motion repeated until frustration became practice, and practice became a language he could trust more than comfort. That is where the public version of Jordan begins to look different. America would later see him above defenders, tongue out, body hanging in the air, as if the hardwood had released him from ordinary rules. Wilmington saw the earlier version, a boy still learning to clean up after loss, still looking at Larry as the nearest mountain, still learning that love inside a family could also sharpen ambition. James Jordan's discipline was not soft, and Michael would later remember his father as a central force in his life. Years later, speaking about James, Jordan called him my rock and said, "We were very close." Before the championships, before Nike, before Chicago, before the number 23 became a symbol people could recognize from a shadow, there was a teenager in North Carolina throwing up shots because being overlooked had left a mark. The first version of his greatness was not flight, it was return. A boy heard that he was not yet enough, and the next day the gym heard him again. A pale blue jersey can look almost weightless in a quiet locker room, but for Michael Jordan at the University of North Carolina, that color carried a discipline he had never met before. Chapel Hill did not treat him like a finished star. Under Dean Smith, the game had rules deeper than talent. Move the ball, trust the system, defend with pride, listen before speaking, earn every minute. Jordan arrived with Wilmington still inside him, the private ache of a young player who had spent years trying to prove he belonged. The gym was larger now, the voices were louder, the expectations had sharper edges. Yet the work stayed familiar, sneakers squeaking before practice. A freshman studying older players, learning where to stand, when to cut, when to disappear into the offense, when to let instinct rise. In that Carolina blue, Jordan was learning that the game would give him a stage only after it tested whether he could obey before he commanded. The ball that left his hands against Georgetown in the 1982 National Collegiate Athletic Association Championship game crossed the distance between promise and burden. Patrick Ewing stood on the other side of that night. Georgetown carried size and force, and Carolina needed one clean act in a room full of pressure. Jordan was still 19, still young enough to be surrounded by teammates after the final whistle, with disbelief on his face, still young enough to smile before he understood the cost of making people believe in him too early. The shot went in. The celebration came. His name began to move through American sports with a different sound. Inside the noise, another contract had been written without paper. When the clock grew thin, people would look for his hands. Chapel Hill became the place where Jordan's talent learned weight. Dean Smith did not build him as a solo act. He placed him inside a structure that forced greatness to pass through discipline. Jordan grew stronger, sharper, more trusted. By 1984, he had become a national name, carrying the confidence of a college champion into the Olympic Games, where he helped the United States win gold before he ever played a minute in the National Basketball Association. That same year, the Chicago Bulls selected him third in the draft, and the boy from Wilmington stood at the edge of a city that had no patience for myth without results. The jersey did not yet hang above an arena. The statue did not exist. There was only a young man with a smooth jump shot, a hard stare, and an old lesson from North Carolina pressed into his bones. Pressure does not vanish when the ball leaves your hand. It waits to see whether you can live with what comes after it goes in. The first time Chicago watched Michael Jordan rise, the city did not yet understand that flight would come with bruises, patience, and repeated humiliation before it became a dynasty. He entered the National Basketball Association in 1984 with a rookie's face and a hunger formed in empty gyms. The Chicago Bulls had waited for a player who could make people look toward the court again, and Jordan gave them motion that seemed almost unreal, the first step that stole a defender's balance, the lean in midair that stretched a crowd's breath, the tongue out, the wrist soft, the body floating long enough for memory to form around it. Air Jordan arrived before the championship. A shoe became a symbol, before the team became a champion. Yet inside the shoe was still a young body hitting the floor, still a young star learning that fame could sell sneakers faster than it could build a contender. In his second season, a broken bone in his foot forced him away from the roar and into recovery. When he returned in the 1986 playoffs and scored 63 points against the Boston Celtics, Larry Bird gave the world a phrase that became part of Jordan's myth, calling him God disguised as Michael Jordan. The words were beautiful, but the scoreboard was colder. Chicago still lost. That night revealed both the miracle and the problem. Jordan could make history almost by himself, but he could not win a crown that way. Then Detroit became the wall. The Pistons did not treat Jordan like a flying artist. They treated him like a problem that had to be contained by bodies, angles, patience, and pressure. They met him early. They crowded the lane. They made every drive feel like a toll. The phrase, "Jordan rules," became shorthand for a painful, physical, deeply personal education. The more extraordinary he became as an individual, the more carefully the postseason exposed the limits of individual greatness. In 1988, he won the scoring title and Defensive Player of the Year. Still, Detroit stood there. In 1989, Chicago pushed closer, and Detroit still sent them home. In 1990, the Bulls reached 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals, close enough to taste the future, and the Pistons still shut the door. Each defeat forced Jordan to see Scottie Pippen growing through pressure, Horace Grant strengthening, and Phil Jackson and Tex Winter shaping the triangle offense into structure. Jordan later said in The Last Dance that people should speak Scottie Pippen's name whenever they spoke his. A lone star could terrify a league. A complete team could change it. By 1991, the story felt different even before the trophy arrived. Jordan's shoulders were stronger, his trust was deeper, and his rage had been trained into something more disciplined. The Bulls no longer looked like a stage built for one man's genius. They looked like a unit with a heartbeat. When they finally swept Detroit in the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals, the moment carried more meaning than revenge. It was the end of a long apprenticeship in pain. The team that had once been shoved back by the same wall now walked past it with a calm that made the previous years feel like necessary fire. Detroit left the floor before the final seconds finished, and Chicago did not need to chase them. Michael Jordan had become a version of himself that could win with others, through others, and for others. That breakthrough led to Magic Johnson, the Los Angeles Lakers, and finally the first ring. When he held the trophy and cried, the tears were the sound of Boston, Detroit, doubt, injury, and years of being told that spectacular was still not enough. The first championship gave his fire a home. It proved that the man who could fly had learned how to land among teammates. The first championship ring did not look heavy enough for everything it carried. In 1991, when Michael Jordan finally held the trophy with the Chicago Bulls, years of exits, hard lessons, Detroit walls, and private fury seemed to gather in his hands. He had spent the early part of his career being praised and doubted at the same time. He was brilliant, they said, but could he win it all? The answer came through trust. Scottie Pippen had become the partner who allowed Jordan's greatness to breathe. Phil Jackson's system gave the fire a shape. The triangle offense turned impatience into rhythm. When the Bulls defeated the Lakers, Jordan's tears with the trophy showed a side of him that the flying posters had never fully explained. That first title opened the door. The second and third turned Chicago into the center of basketball's weather. In 1992, the Dream Team carried the National Basketball Association across the world, and Jordan became the face of a game expanding beyond American arenas. Children knew the shoes. Opponents wanted photographs. Every road game became part theater, part shrine. Yet the brighter the light became, the less room Jordan had for ordinary exhaustion. Winning once had felt like release. Winning again became duty. Winning a third time made the world look at him as if fatigue, privacy, grief, and family were details greatness should be able to defeat. Then 1993 arrived, and the parade music could not reach the empty place in Jordan's life. James Jordan, the father he later called his rock, was gone. The man who had challenged him, steadied him, warned him, driven him, and given him a voice of reason was no longer standing near the edge of the story. Basketball had given Michael a language for pain. If he was overlooked, he practiced. If he was doubted, he scored. If he was blocked, he came back stronger. But this loss did not give him a defender to beat or a clock to conquer. There was no fourth quarter for it. During his first retirement, Jordan spoke about how short life could be and said there were times when a person had to put games aside. Those words matter because they were the words of a son standing in a world that had suddenly become unfamiliar. So he stepped away. Baseball entered the story as a field of grief, connected to his father's dream, to childhood, to another American sound, the crack of a bat, the dust near the base, the slower rhythm, the humility of failure arriving pitch by pitch. In Birmingham, the bat did not obey him the way the basketball had. Every ordinary baseball struggle was watched through the lens of global fame. Yet there was dignity in that exposure, because grief had rearranged the meaning of winning. On March 18, 1995, the comeback arrived in two words: "I'm back." But the Jordan who returned was not the same man who had left. He wore number 45 at first, a number connected to baseball and to a man trying to return carefully. Orlando reminded him that memory alone could not win a playoff series. That summer he worked, he sharpened. Chicago entered the 1995-1996 season with a hunger that felt almost sacred. The team won 72 games, and every victory felt like a man restoring a room inside himself. Then came Father's Day 1996. The date was almost too heavy for a script, yet life placed it there with no need for decoration. The Bulls finished the finals against the Seattle Supersonics, and Jordan had the championship again. The world could say the comeback was complete, but when the cameras found him afterward, he was down on the locker room floor, clutching the ball, overcome by emotion, surrounded by the noise of celebration and yet separated from it by the deepest private absence of his life. That image should sit at the center of this entire story. It is the moment where Michael Jordan the champion and Michael Jordan the son become impossible to separate. Around him, the room celebrated a title. Inside him, a quieter room remained incomplete. Just the image, number 23, the championship ball, Father's Day, and a man still reaching for someone who could no longer walk through the door. After that floor, The final years of the Bulls dynasty carry a different meaning. The flu game in 1997 became a portrait of the cost of command. In Utah, he moved with visible exhaustion, bent over between moments, protected by focus when strength looked thin. He still found 38 points, and Pippen helped him leave the court. In 1998, the final shot in Utah gave the world its cleanest frame. The dribble, the separation, the rise, the release, the arm extended, the building stunned. It looked like closure. But by then, Jordan had carried grief, returned from absence, and learned that even the most beautiful ending leaves a human being behind after the horn. 6 rings can look clean in a glass case. They do not show Father's Day on the locker room floor. They do not show the empty chair. They do not show the private cost of being expected to win every time your hands touch the ball. The ice pack tells a quieter truth than the highlight reel. It sits against the skin after the crowd has left, after television has chosen the best angle, after the arena workers begin their slow work beneath dimmer lights. Michael Jordan's body was the instrument America believed it knew. The leap from the free throw line, the floating layup, the fadeaway rising beyond a defender's reach, the shoulders squared in late-game stillness. Yet the real body had mornings after all that. Ankles stiffening before practice, feet carrying old memory, knees answering late, tape wrapped tighter, because belief alone could not hold a joint in place. Sports history often remembers the flight. The athlete remembers the landing. The broken foot in the 1985 to 1986 season was an early warning that Jordan's body, for all its grace, remained flesh and bone. He had entered the league like a storm, and then the storm had to sit. For a player built around motion, being held back can feel like being removed from his own language. The gym continued without him. His locker still waited. When Jordan returned and created the 63-point night in Boston, the public wrapped the comeback in awe. Beneath it was a more complicated exchange. He could come back, he could astonish, and his body would still keep a record of every demand. The flu game in 1997 became part of the Jordan legend because it looked like willpower defeating weakness under the brightest lights. A black and red pair of Air Jordan 12 shoes moved across the floor in Utah, but the man inside them was visibly drained, folding at the waist, eyes heavy, towel close, breath measured between possessions. The box score preserved 38 points. The image of Pippen supporting him afterward preserved the cost. Washington made that truth harder to soften. When Jordan returned with the Wizards, the uniform itself seemed to create a distance from memory. The colors were wrong for anyone who had grown up seeing him in Chicago red. The arena lights still found him, and for stretches, the old skills appeared. The footwork, the jumper, the competitive glare that could still make younger players feel they were being measured by history. Yet the body had changed. He was older, and the game had no sentimental rule, allowing legends to move as they once did. Knee tendonitis and torn cartilage in his right knee became part of the 2001 to 2002 season, and surgery followed in 2002. The language around the injury was clinical, but the daily loss was intimate. It was the slower walk to the training table, the hand resting on the knee before standing, the stationary bike replacing the open court. By the final season in 2002-2003, the ovations carried respect and farewell at the same time. At 40, the final walk away from the National Basketball Association did not erase the fire. It only left the fire with fewer places to go. The shoes could still be displayed. The jersey could still be lifted into rafters. The knees, the feet, the mornings after games, those belonged to the man alone. The television screen made the old locker room feel alive again, but the room was gone. In 2020, when The Last Dance brought the Chicago Bulls back into American living rooms, the footage looked almost perfectly preserved. Michael Jordan in red, Scottie Pippen running beside him, Phil Jackson watching from the bench, Dennis Rodman moving through the edges of chaos, the United Center breathing like a living animal. For fans, it was a return. For the men who had actually lived inside that dynasty, the return was more complicated. A championship season can be edited into a clean arc, but memory does not always follow the shape of a broadcast. Jordan had spent his career under replay, and now even his past had become another arena. The interviews were lit carefully. The old clips carried new music. The final shot in Utah appeared again, held in the air as if time had agreed to stay still. Yet the people in that story had aged. The scoreboard still said Chicago won. The private accounting was harder to read. The public chapters outside the court had always carried their own weight. In the early 1990s, his betting habits drew intense scrutiny, and the cameras found him in a different kind of pressure, one without a defender in front of him or a clock above the backboard. The fairest way to hold that period is with restraint. There was scrutiny, there were questions, and there were limits to what outsiders could responsibly claim. Then came baseball, and a different kind of public discomfort. After losing his father, Jordan stepped into minor league fields where the stands were smaller, the bus rides longer, and the game refused to recognize his basketball throne. A swing and a miss can make any player look exposed, but for Jordan, every ordinary baseball failure arrived with the weight of a nation watching a basketball icon learn discomfort in public. Washington later brought another replay of distance. The Wizards' locker did not hold Pippen's shoes nearby. Phil Jackson was not walking through the room with that calm, watchful presence. Rodman was not there to pull chaos into rebounding. The uniform did not match the memory. Years later, The Last Dance reopened the archive with force. For many viewers, it restored the majesty of the Bulls. For Scottie Pippen, the restoration came with pain. Pippen later made clear that he felt the documentary placed Jordan too firmly at the center and left teammates in a smaller light. That criticism deserves care. Pippen was not a footnote to the dynasty. He was the defender, the playmaker, the long shadow beside Jordan's brilliance, and one of the bodies that made the Bulls possible. Jordan himself called Pippen his greatest teammate in the documentary, but praise spoken years later could not settle every wound created by contracts, credit, sacrifice, and the loneliness of remembering the same room differently. The public replayed 1998 as a perfect ending. The people who lived it remembered ice bags, negotiations, tension, pride, fatigue, and old conversations that never fit neatly into 10 episodes. A dynasty can share trophies and still divide memory. Years later, the question becomes whether the fire that built everything can survive when the game no longer lets him answer with his own body. The jersey stayed above the floor, but Michael Jordan no longer stood beneath it in uniform. After his final National Basketball Association retirement in 2003, the game entered a strange arrangement with him. It kept using his image, his shoes, his highlights, his standard, and his name, while asking the living man to stand outside the lines where he had once controlled every possession. For most people, retirement suggests rest. For an athlete shaped by repetition, trainers, shoot-arounds, flights, film sessions, whistles, fourth quarters, and the daily ache of preparation, retirement can feel like a room with no markings on the floor. The calendar changes first. Then the mornings, then the body. The old habits remain in the hands, but there is no game at night to justify them. The Hall of Fame podium in 2009 gave him a formal place among the immortals, and even there he sounded like a man whose relationship with the game had not ended. He called basketball his refuge and said it had been a source of intense pain as well as joy. Near the close, he spoke the line that still follows him. Limits, like fears, are often just an illusion. It sounded inspirational, but in his voice it also carried restlessness. Charlotte became one place for that fire to go. As majority owner of the Bobcats and later the Hornets, Jordan moved from the body of the game into its architecture. The role looked powerful from the outside. Suites instead of benches, decisions instead of jumpers, ownership instead of box scores. Yet the change carried its own distance. A player knows the ball in his hand. An owner watches other hands decide the night. The camera might still find Jordan in the building, seated with that familiar face, but the old command was gone. He could not rise from the owner's seat and take the last shot. He could not guard the opponent's best scorer. When the sale of his majority stake in the Charlotte Hornets was finalized in August 2023, another door closed with dignity and quiet finality. Jordan remained a minority owner, but the emotional image is simple. The man who once decided games by touching the ball had learned another form of distance. He could build, invest, advise, and watch. He could no longer make his own body the answer. NASCAR gave him a different soundtrack. The squeak of hardwood became the roar of engines. With 23XI Racing, launched with Denny Hamlin in 2020, Jordan stood near competition again, close enough to feel risk and pressure, far enough to know another athlete would carry the final lap. In February 2026, Tyler Reddick won the Daytona 500 for 23XI Racing, and Jordan celebrated openly in victory lane. The moment was real and beautiful, yet it revealed the shape of his second life. He was winning. He was not driving. NBC brought him near basketball again, as a special contributor for the 2025-2026 season. A studio role is a long way from a free throw line. Age does not erase greatness. It changes its address. The number 23 still hangs where fans can look up and feel younger for a moment. Down below, the game keeps moving. A ball finds new hands. A whistle starts another night. And the old body that once made pressure obey has to live with the quietest wound in an athlete's second life. The show continues without needing him to run out of the tunnel. The businessman was born long before the world called Michael Jordan a billionaire. He was born in the strange space between a rookie contract and a pair of shoes that began to move through America like a second language. In 1984, the Air Jordan idea changed the relationship between athlete, product, style, and identity. Before the first ring, before the statue, before the final shot, there was already a silhouette forming in the culture. Jordan became a symbol that walked through schools, playgrounds, shopping malls, music videos, street corners, and family photographs. Over time, the brand became an extension of the same discipline that had shaped him on the court. Details mattered, presentation mattered, standards mattered, winning mattered. When Jordan Brand became its own division under Nike in 1997, the athlete was no longer only selling excellence from the court. He was building a commercial language around it. That business arc should never be told like a cold money story. The deeper point is that the qualities that made him difficult, relentless, demanding, and almost impossible to satisfy on the court did not disappear when the games ended. They moved into rooms with executives, designers, partners, ownership groups, and long-term decisions. The edges looked different, but the instinct remained. The Air Jordan line became a cultural empire. The Jordan brand became a standard. Endorsements became ownership thinking. Ownership became legacy thinking. Charlotte brought him into the rare position of a former player who controlled a National Basketball Association franchise at the majority level. That move was historic, and it also carried pressure of another kind. In ownership, failure is slower, less cinematic, and more frustrating because the owner cannot check himself into the game. When Forbes placed Jordan among America's richest people, and when his wealth rose into the billionaire class, the headline seemed to confirm a clean second victory. The boy from Wilmington had become a global athlete, a cultural icon, an owner, and a billionaire. But the emotional truth remains layered. Wealth can widen a legacy, yet it cannot replace the roar when the ball leaves your hand. It cannot give the knees their old spring. It cannot return a father to Father's Day 1996. This is why the business chapter must serve the portrait, not take it over. Jordan's financial empire matters because it shows how his competitive identity survived the end of his playing career. It gave the fire somewhere to go. Air Jordan kept flying after Michael's body stopped flying. Charlotte gave him a seat where franchises are shaped. 23XI Racing gave him risk again, speed again, and NBC gave him a doorway back into basketball without asking him to wear a uniform. His second empire proves that Jordan could still build after the final buzzer. It is moving because even that empire cannot fully answer the ache of no longer being the one with the ball. A clinic door opening in the morning makes a softer sound than an arena exploding after a final shot. In North Carolina, where the roots of Michael Jordan's discipline were planted long before Chicago learned his name, his legacy began to take on a quieter form. The Michael Jordan family medical clinics did not ask him to leap, score, or carry a franchise. They asked his name to help open access. The waiting rooms held a different kind of pressure. Parents filling out forms, patients searching for care, children sitting beside adults who had already carried worry into the day. There were no banners hanging from rafters, no referees, no final possession. The light was ordinary. The stakes were human. In 2017, Jordan gave $7 million to Novant Health to open 2 family clinics in Charlotte, designed to bring primary and preventive care to communities with limited access. Years later, the partnership expanded into Wilmington and Charlotte, and Novant Health described 4 Michael Jordan family medical clinics serving underserved communities. In 2025, Jordan made another $10 million gift honoring his mother, Dolores Jordan, through what became the Novant Health Dolores P. Jordan Neurosciences Institute. By then, Novant Health said it had received a total of $27 million from him. The numbers matter because they built real doors, real rooms, and real care. Yet the emotional weight sits in the names. Wilmington was the place of the boy before the brand, before the shoes, before the dynasty. Dolores Jordan was part of the discipline and steadiness that kept the early house together. To place her name on a center for care is to move the family story away from trophies and into a building where people arrive vulnerable, hoping someone will help them keep going. There is a striking contrast between the Jordan the world bought and the Jordan these clinics represent. For decades, his body was a national spectacle. His shoes were sold in millions of pairs. His silhouette flew across advertisements, bedroom walls, city courts, and memory itself. The body that once gave people wonder now stands behind institutions meant to care for other bodies, many of them far from cameras. A man who had been measured by points helped create places where a person did not need to be famous to be seen. This is not a clean ending. Giving does not erase the years of strain, the missing father, the old debates, the body that could no longer fly on command, or the teammates who remember certain rooms differently. A clinic is not a trophy replacing pain. It is a different use of a life that still carries pain. Jordan placed part of his power where the scoreboard could not follow. In those rooms, the old number 23 does not need to appear above the court. A person walks through a clinic door, and the legacy moves without applause. The ball is no longer in Michael Jordan's hands, but the world still watches the space around him. At 63, he remains one of the few athletes whose name feels less like a biography than a weather system still moving through American culture. He is a businessman, a billionaire, a husband to Yvette Prieto, a father of 5 children, a minority owner of the Charlotte Hornets, a co-owner of 23XI Racing, and a special contributor connected to NBC's National Basketball Association coverage. His shoes still appear on feet too young to remember the Chicago Bulls dynasty. His highlights still teach young players how pressure once looked in human form. His number still hangs above the United Center floor, fixed in a place where time cannot make it miss a shot. Yet the man himself lives below all that, in days where competition has to find new doors and memory follows him before anyone says a word. In the 1990s, an entire arena could rise because Jordan touched the ball. Now he may sit near a broadcast, stand in a NASCAR garage, or walk into a clinic connected to his family name and see a kind of impact that has no box score. The public version remains enormous. 6 championships, 6 finals most valuable player awards, 5 regular season most valuable player awards, 10 scoring titles, the final shot, and the shoes. The private version is older, quieter, forced to accept that no disciplined body can stay inside its finest moment forever. Jordan's current life still carries motion. The racing team gives him risk, speed, conflict, and the old hunger of trying to win in a place where certainty never exists. NBC gives him a way to stand near the league that made him eternal. Business keeps his name moving with rare force. Family keeps him connected to a life wider than competition. Philanthropy carries him back to North Carolina, where the boy from Wilmington has become a name on doors meant to help people who will never sit courtside. Still, the central truth remains unsentimental. The crowd cannot give him back his father. Wealth cannot return the exact body that rose over defenders. A documentary cannot make every teammate remember the dynasty the same way. A ceremony cannot restore the private years consumed by public demand. He has won almost everything a basketball player can win, and time did not step aside for him. After the last shot, the ball fell through the net, the arm stayed extended, and the image became immortal. But immortality belongs to images. Life belongs to the person who wakes up after them. That is why the Father's Day locker room floor still matters. Michael Jordan was never only the man above the rim. He was also the son on the floor, holding a basketball like the last piece of a conversation he could no longer finish. And maybe that is where his story finally closes its circle. The jersey still hangs high above the United Center, number 23 lifted beyond reach, bright enough for strangers to look up and remember who they were when he played. Down below, the hardwood waits for younger legs. The ball finds new hands. Somewhere, an engine starts for 23XI Racing. Somewhere a studio light turns on. Somewhere a clinic door opens in the morning. And somewhere inside the man who once owned the final shot, the contest continues in a quieter place, beyond the reach of any scoreboard. On Father's Day 1996, he held the ball and cried because the one person he wanted most could not walk into the room. Decades later, the world still sees the champion. The deeper story asks us to remember the sun. Michael Jordan taught basketball how high a human being could rise. His life after the roar teaches us how heavy the landing can be.